At 8:15 a.m. on a frigid Tuesday morning, my credit card was rejected at the supermarket checkout for a simple cart of essentials. The cashier's impatient stare burned into me as I fumbled for my phone, dialing my father's number with a growing knot in my stomach. His voice, when he finally answered, was chillingly calm and laced with smug satisfaction. "I've deactivated every single one of your cards," he announced flatly. "You're a soldier, not a financier. It's high time you understood your position in this household." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply ended the call, placed my phone back in my purse, and walked out of the store into the biting wind. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking lot of our local bank. Within 4 hours, my father's phone was flooded with 47 frantic voicemails, and the financial empire he thought he ruled had been locked down tighter than a vault. He assumed he was punishing a dependent daughter. He had no clue that the very foundation of his world was built on my terms. Welcome back to Zarabell Stories. Power isn't given, it's quietly built when no one is watching. Before we get into the real story, take a moment to type where you're watching from in the comments. I'm always curious to see where our viewers are tuning in. And make sure you stick around until the very end because the revelation in the final moments will completely change how you see this story. My name is Amanda Pierce, and I'm 38 years old. For the last 7 years, I've held a position of Director of Operations for Pierce & Associates Freight Solutions. I'm a former Army logistics specialist, so when my mother passed away unexpectedly and left our family enterprise in disarray, I left my post and came back home. I didn't do it for recognition or a paycheck. I did it to rescue my father's company from a mountain of debt that was threatening to swallow it whole. When my card was declined at the grocery store that morning, I genuinely thought it was a banking error. But my father, Arthur Pierce, made it abundantly clear that it was a deliberate act. "I've cut off your corporate spending, Amanda," he stated, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're starting to believe you're indispensable, but you're just an employee. It's time you remembered your place." In the background, I could hear the faint, snide laughter of my stepmother, Patricia, and her 27-year-old son, Derek. For weeks, they had been subtly poisoning my father's mind, urging him to curtail my influence so Derek could step into my role. Arthur was convinced that by taking away my financial access, he was putting me in my place, punishing me for vetoing a risky property deal Derek had been pushing for. He believed my entire existence depended on his goodwill. He was under the impression he had just stripped me of all my power, leaving me vulnerable and desperate. He was utterly oblivious to the fact that he had just set his own downfall in motion. To grasp the depth of my father's arrogance, you need to understand how Pierce & Associates managed to survive the previous 5 years. When I left the military, the firm was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, with only a few months of runway left. Years of poor investments and loose financial controls had bled our accounts dry. To save it, I didn't just work punishingly long weeks. I poured my late mother's entire inheritance back into the company to restructure its debts. I overhauled our supply chain, secured vital transport contracts, and painstakingly rebuilt our standing in the industry. Throughout all of this, Arthur sat in his plush corner office, smiling for awards and taking full credit for the company's miraculous turnaround. I let him. I believe that's what family did for each other. Then Patricia entered the picture. She married my father 2 years ago, bringing her son, Derek, a man whose resume was mostly a collection of failed business schemes and dropped classes. Almost immediately, Patricia started eroding my father's confidence in me. She painted me as rigid and cold, while championing Derek as the dynamic visionary the company desperately needed. Derek was angling for a massive executive salary, unlimited spending privileges, and total control over our most lucrative real estate holdings. When I refused to authorize his ill-conceived development project the previous week, Arthur perceived it as a direct challenge to his authority. He believed that cutting off my funds would break my will, force me to apologize, and force me back into submission. He thought financial leverage was his ultimate weapon. But Arthur, Patricia, and Derek were clueless about one critical fact. As I sat in my car outside the grocery store, the dial tone humming in my ear, I felt no fear. Instead, a sharp, icy clarity washed over me. I started the engine and headed directly to Commercial First Bank. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung open, and I walked across the hushed marble floor. I bypassed the teller lines and went straight to the back office, where Mr. Henderson, the senior commercial manager, was reviewing files. He had overseen our corporate accounts for over 2 decades and knew our financial history intimately. He looked up, his warm smile vanishing into a look of concern as he saw my face. "Amanda, what's going on?" he asked, rising to offer me a seat. "You look like you're on a warpath."
I set my folder on his desk.
Arthur just deactivated all my corporate credit, I said, my voice steady. He's under the impression he's cut off my allowance.
Mr. Henderson stared at me, aghast. He did what?
Is he completely insane?
I took out a leather-bound dossier from my bag and placed it before him.
Inside were the original trust agreements and debt restructuring contracts from 5 years prior. When the company was on the brink, Arthur had signed these documents to secure my financial investment. In his rush to avoid public humiliation, he had never read the fine print.
Please access the master account structure, I instructed him.
It's time we acted on the covenants. Mr. Henderson put on his reading glasses, opened his terminal, and pulled up the records. The reality was quite straightforward. The credit lines Arthur had cancelled weren't reliant on company revenue. They were subsidiary accounts, funded directly by my primary master trust, a trust that held the principal claim on every single asset, account, and property belonging to Pierce and Associates.
Arthur hadn't stopped my money. He had simply severed his own access to it.
Mr. Henderson looked up from his screen, his expression a mixture of shock and professional admiration. Amanda, if we enforce these covenants today, your father's primary accounts will be frozen immediately. He won't even be able to process payroll. I responded without a moment's hesitation. Do it. Revoke his signature authority on all credit facilities, freeze the secondary corporate cards, and halt all transfers to his personal expense accounts. A few simple keystrokes, and the financial system that sustained my father's extravagant lifestyle was shut down. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Arthur was dining at an exclusive downtown restaurant. He had invited Patricia, Derek, and a pair of commercial real estate agents to celebrate his decisive action against me. They ordered vintage wines and expensive steaks, with Derek loudly outlining his plans to transform my department. When the check arrived, Arthur confidently placed his platinum corporate card on the tray. Moments later, the waiter returned, looking flustered. I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined. Arthur chuckled, assuming it was a simple network glitch, and handed over another card.
Declined. Patricia tried hers. Declined. Derek attempted his company allowance card. Declined.
Every card tied to the Pierce name was utterly useless. Panic descended on the table as Arthur was forced to scrape together whatever cash he had just to pay the exorbitant bill. By the time he stormed out to his car, his phone was exploding with alerts from vendors and utilities.
My phone began ringing non-stop.
Arthur's name flashed on the screen over and over.
I let every single call go to voicemail.
By 2 p.m, Arthur had called an emergency board meeting. He was convinced I had orchestrated a malicious attack on the company's banking system and was prepared to have me publicly humiliated and fired. I walked into the glass-walled conference room to find the atmosphere thick with tension. Arthur was seated at the head of the long table, flanked by Patricia and Derek. His face was a furious shade of red. The 4 senior board members looked around, their faces etched with confusion. You've crossed a line, Amanda, Arthur shouted, slamming his fist on the table. You've interfered with corporate accounts. The board is here to formally remove you from your position and terminate your employment. Patricia wore a triumphant smirk, while Derek puffed out his chest, trying to project an air of authority.
I remained calm.
I walked to the center of the room, set my briefcase on the table, and nodded toward Mr. Henderson and my corporate lawyer, who had just entered behind me. You can't fire me, Arthur, I said, my voice unwavering, because you don't own this company. Arthur let out a harsh, barking laugh.
I built this empire.
My name is on the front door. Your name is on the sign, but my name is on the deed, I countered. I opened my binder and handed each board member a thick financial report. 5 years ago, to save this company from your disastrous leadership, you signed over 60% of the voting equity to my trust in exchange for my bailout.
You are not the owner, Arthur.
You are an employee, and right now, your future here is being evaluated.
The room went deathly silent.
The board members leafed through the documents, their eyes widening as they absorbed the incontrovertible proof. The trust covenants had activated, giving me complete legal and financial control over Pierce and Associates. Arthur's face went pale. His hands trembled as he stared at the paper in front of him.
Patricia gasped, realizing the life she had grown accustomed to was over. Derek just sat, frozen, looking utterly lost.
This can't be legal, Arthur stammered, his voice drained of all its previous arrogance.
You're my daughter. You can't do this.
You thought nothing of family loyalty when you tried to embarrass me at a grocery store, I reminded him.
You wanted to play power games.
Now you get to play by my rules.
I turned my gaze to Derek. Derek, you need to clear out your desk.
Your position is terminated, and if you are on this property after 5 o'clock, security will escort you out.
He scrambled from his chair and fled the room without a word. Patricia glared at me, but I cut her off before she could speak. Your credit is cancelled, Patricia. And the company car you're driving?
It needs to be returned by 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Finally, I focused on my father.
The arrogant titan was gone, replaced by a bewildered old man. You have two choices, I said, leaning closer. You can resign gracefully today with a modest retirement package, or I will initiate a complete forensic audit into the funds you attempted to redirect into Patricia's secret accounts.
Choose. Arthur chose the quiet retirement.
He knew that fighting me would lead to public disgrace and potential legal trouble. Within 2 weeks, he had signed the papers and surrendered his keys. Without the company's money to fund her lifestyle, Patricia filed for separation within a year. I assumed the role of CEO and reorganized Pierce and Associates into a thriving, ethically run business. But more than saving the company, I reclaimed my own self-worth. I learned that real authority isn't about shouting orders or crushing others. It's about the quiet discipline to protect what you've built and the courage to enforce your boundaries. Now I'm curious, have you ever had to confront someone who tried to control you through money?
What would you do if a family member tried to pull a stunt like this? Drop your experiences in the comments below.
If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like, subscribe to Zarabell Stories, and check out the next video on your screen right now.
Thank you for watching.